I can't waste my life on a man with nothing. You'll never be more than a broke dreamer. Emma Carter spat at her husband as she packed her bags, laughing at the faded hoodie and the tiny apartment she was leaving behind. Hours later, she was in another man's penthouse, convinced she had traded up. But she had no idea that the poor man she abandoned was secretly the billionaire CEO at the top of the very empire her new lover worked for. And when the truth exploded at the gala, her humiliation was complete. What happened next will make you question greed, loyalty, and betrayal in ways you've never imagined. Viewers, if you were Daniel, would you forgive, or would you make her pay? Let us know. She left her husband because she thought he was poor, mocked his old car, his late nights, his faded hoodie. She ran into the arms of a man dripping in wealth, convinced she'd finally secured the life she deserved. But what she never imagined was this. The husband she abandoned was secretly a billionaire CEO, and the rich man she chose instead was nothing more than her ex-husband's employee. One night, at a glittering gala, the truth exploded, and Emma Carter's world collapsed in front of everyone. The glow of the kettle's red light flickered across Emma Carter's face as she stood in their cramped kitchen, arms crossed, watching Daniel hunched over his laptop again. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast and stale coffee, not perfume and chandeliers. She hated that smell. Another late night, she asked, voice sharp, though she already knew the answer. Daniel's fingers tapped steadily on the keys. His hoodie sleeves were pushed up, veins taut on his forearms. Investor calls, he murmured, eyes still on the screen. One more push, Em. We're close. She scoffed, stirring her coffee. You've been saying that for years. Close to what, exactly? Another rejection? His jaw tightened but he didn't rise to the bait. That was Daniel's way, calm, measured, never cruel back. Once, she had admired that quiet steadiness. Now, it grated. The second phone on the counter buzzed, a sleek black device she had never been allowed to touch. Daniel declined the call instantly. Who keeps calling you this late? Compliance, he said smoothly. Background checks for a prospective partner. The words were plausible, but Emma had lived with him long enough to know when something ran deeper. She caught a glimpse of the document on his screen before he closed it, bold letters reading H, Holdings, Confidential. Her mind flicked back to the night she first met Daniel at university. He'd been the boy who fixed her father's projector at a business seminar, sleeves rolled up, grin boyish. She'd fallen in love with his brains, his certainty that one day he'd build something lasting. But years of ramen dinners and second-hand furniture had buried that dream under frustration. A rap on the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Groves from down the hall poked her head in, smiling at Daniel. Morning, Mr. Hayes. Oh, sorry, Daniel. Thank you for fixing the router last night. Internet's faster than the city office now. Happy to help, ma'am, Daniel said warmly. Such a gentleman, she said, adding with curious deference, thank you, sir. Emma bristled. Sir. Since when did neighbors call a broke man sir? Later that evening, she found herself standing in the gallery where she worked, gazing at the man with the watch that gleamed like bottled sunlight. Richard Caldwell. He leaned on the counter as if he owned the air. You see beauty where others don't, Richard told her, studying the way she arranged canvases. That's rare. Emma laughed nervously, her chest tight. Daniel never said things like that anymore. By the time Richard opened the door of his sleek black Mercedes and said, You deserve brightness, Emma. Not dim bulbs and delayed promises, her resolve was already faltering. At home, near midnight, she noticed Daniel wasn't back yet. Through the blinds, she glimpsed headlights. A man in a suit opened the rear door of a luxury sedan. Daniel slid inside, head low, hoodie up. The car whispered away into the night. Her pulse skipped. That wasn't the sedan they owned. That wasn't the life she knew. Who are you really talking to, Daniel? she whispered to the empty apartment, but silence was her only answer. The next morning, Emma slipped on her best dress before heading to work, smoothing the fabric like it might erase the wrinkles in her life. Daniel sat at the counter, laptop open, 2 phones lined neatly by his elbow. He looked up briefly, eyes rimmed red from another sleepless night. "You look nice," he said softly. "It's a gallery," she replied, shrugging. "I can't show up looking cheap." He gave a small nod, and something unreadable flickered in his expression, hurt, maybe, or disappointment, but he said nothing. That was Daniel's way. Silent endurance, a fortress of patience she no longer knew how to admire. At the gallery, Richard Caldwell waited with the confidence of a man who had never heard no. He wore a charcoal suit, his cufflinks catching the light like deliberate weapons. He purchased 3 paintings without looking at the price tags, then turned his attention on Emma. "Dinner tonight," he said. Not asked, said. "There's a place overlooking the harbor. You'll love it." Emma hesitated, thinking of Daniel's tired eyes and the leftover soup in their fridge. Then she thought of chandeliers and wine poured by gloved hands. "All right," she whispered. That night, Richard drove her through streets lit like fire, past restaurants she'd only seen in magazines. Over oysters and laughter, he leaned close. "You deserve more than scraps, Emma. Why waste your youth waiting on a man with nothing to give?" His words slid under her skin like truth she'd always known. While Emma drifted into Richard's world, Daniel was elsewhere. At a conference room downtown, he sat at the head of a long table, not in a hoodie but in a tailored suit, the kind that didn't announce itself yet commanded attention. Around him, executives took notes as he spoke. "We finalized the merger by Friday. Discretion remains paramount," Daniel said, voice steady, clipped. "I don't want my private life entangled with corporate headlines." "Yes, Mr. Hayes," the executives chorused. He signed the final document with a flourish. The signature on the page, Daniel A. Hayes, CEO, H&N Global, was proof of an empire Emma had never imagined. He tucked the papers into a folder, slid his phone back into his pocket, and left through the service elevator, slipping back into the plain hoodie that let him disappear. Back in the gallery, Emma's friend Leah watched as Richard kissed Emma's hand outside the restaurant. "Careful," Leah muttered later. "Rich men like him. They play games. Daniel may not have millions, but at least he loves you." Emma laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't pay rent. Love doesn't buy futures." When she returned home, Daniel was waiting in the living room, the glow of the desk lamp casting shadows on his face. "You didn't answer your phone," he said evenly. "I was busy," she snapped. He studied her with unsettling calm. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emma." His voice carried no anger, only resignation. That made it worse. She turned away, clutching her purse tighter, missing the moment his second phone buzzed again. On the screen flashed a single letter, H. And for the first time, Daniel didn't decline. He answered. "Yes," he said. "Proceed." The rain hadn't yet fallen, but the city air felt heavy with it when Emma left the apartment the next evening. Daniel stood in the doorway, leaning one shoulder against the frame, hair still damp from his shower. "You're late again," he said, not accusing, just observing. Emma tightened her grip on her purse strap. "I told you, there's an exhibition to prep." An exhibition, or Richard Caldwell? His voice was quiet, but the name landed like a stone. She flinched, then straightened, meeting his gaze. "At least Richard knows how to live. At least he doesn't keep me trapped in some shoebox apartment with promises that never come true." For a long moment, Daniel only looked at her, those calm gray eyes unreadable. Then he stepped aside. "If that's the life you want, Emma, take it." She expected shouting, a fight, some desperate plea. Instead, his quiet release cut deeper than rage. She walked away anyway. Richard welcomed her with a kiss on the cheek, his cologne crisp, his car gleaming like liquid steel beneath the streetlights. "I knew you'd see sense," he said, guiding her in. "Daniel's small time, Emma. You're meant for more." And as the car purred through the city, Emma told herself she believed him. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in the apartment. He poured himself a glass of water, set it on the counter, and stared at the empty chair across from him. A memory flickered, Emma laughing on their wedding day, lace brushing against his hand as she signed her name. Back then, she told him she didn't care about money. Back then, he'd believed her. His phone vibrated. He picked up the sleek black one, the one Emma never touched. "Yes," he said. "File the paperwork. The divorce will be uncontested. Make sure the prenup is airtight." On the other end, his lawyer's voice was crisp. "Of course, Mr. Hayes." The name, Mr. Hayes, spoken with reverence, echoed in the empty kitchen. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then returned to his laptop. On the screen glowed charts, mergers, expansion plans, all the things he had hidden from Emma to see if she loved him without them. At a rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor, Richard lifted his glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his smile sharp. Emma clinked her glass against his, forcing a smile. But somewhere deep inside, unease prickled. Richard's world was dazzling, wine, wealth, promises, but his eyes carried calculation more than affection. Still, she ignored the warning. "Your ex," Richard said suddenly, swirling his drink. "Don't waste another thought on him. He'll never touch the circles I move in." Emma laughed, though it felt brittle. "You're right. Daniel was nothing." Back in the apartment, Daniel folded the prenup neatly into a folder. He traced Emma's signature with his thumb, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I was nothing to you," he murmured to the silence. "But you'll learn who I am." And as the clock ticked past midnight, a storm finally broke outside, rain streaking down the window like the city itself was whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Emma adjusted the diamond necklace Richard had draped around her neck, its cold weight pressing against her skin like both proof and burden. She stood before a mirror in his penthouse, surrounded by glass walls that looked out over the skyline. Below, the city pulsed with light and movement, everything she thought she deserved. Richard emerged from the bedroom, fastening his cufflinks. "Perfect," he said, eyeing her in the reflection. "You look like you belong here." She smiled faintly, though a part of her wondered why those words sounded more like possession than admiration. Still, the penthouse was warm, the champagne cold, the life dazzling. How could she miss Daniel's dingy apartment after this? But at night, unease crept in. When Richard left for meetings, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed with messages he never explained. His laughter with friends felt rehearsed. The way he spoke about his boss, always Mr. Hayes, never a first name, carried an edge of fear. One evening, over dinner at an exclusive club, Richard leaned back, his voice lowered. "When you meet him, you'll understand. Mr. Hayes isn't like other men. He built everything from nothing. The kind of man who can make or break entire empires with a phone call." Emma sipped her wine, curiosity flickering. "Sounds intimidating." Richard smirked. "He's the kind of man I aspire to be. But even I wouldn't cross him." Her stomach tightened. She laughed lightly, masking the strange discomfort that pulsed at the mention of the mysterious boss. Meanwhile, Daniel's night stretched long in boardrooms and conference calls. He moved like a shadow across high-rise offices, a leader wrapped in secrecy. "Our expansion into Asia is approved," he told his executives one night, his calm authority filling the room. "But keep everything confidential. Publicity will come on my terms." "Yes, Mr. Hayes," they replied in unison. Afterwards, he left through the underground garage, slipping into the plain sedan Emma once mocked. Even now, with billions under his command, he clung to simplicity outside the spotlight. He'd wanted to know if Emma's love was for him, or for what he had. Now, the answer was clear. Back in the penthouse, Emma stood at the window as Richard kissed her shoulder. "You've upgraded, darling," he whispered. "Daniel was never going to give you this." She forced a smile, but a flash of memory stabbed her, the quiet evenings with Daniel bent over his laptop, his tired but unwavering gaze when he told her, "I hope you find what you're looking for." She shook it off as Richard handed her a glass of champagne. "Tomorrow night's the gala," he said. "The company's annual event. You'll finally see what real power looks like." Emma laughed, resting her head on his chest. "I can't wait." But outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in stark flashes, like the world itself was preparing her for the moment everything she thought she knew would unravel. The gala shimmered like a dream carved from light. Crystal chandeliers rained fire across marble floors, and violins sang in the corners as waiters glided by with trays of champagne. Emma Carter stepped through the towering glass doors on Richard's arm, her heart swelling with nervous triumph. This was the world she had longed for, the one she believed Daniel could never give her. "Keep your chin up," Richard murmured, guiding her forward with a confident hand at the small of her back. "Everyone here will be watching. Tonight, they'll know you belong to me." She smiled tightly, letting him lead her into the current of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Every woman glimmered, every man radiated polished power. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like the poor girl at the window watching from the outside. She was inside now. Richard shook hands, laughed too loudly, introduced her to men with heavy rings and women with eyes that sized her up like competition. Over and over, Emma heard his words repeated with reverence, "Wait until you meet Mr. Hayes." The name hovered everywhere. She couldn't escape it. Mr. Hayes, the invisible center of the room. Executives whispered about him like a god who might appear at any moment. Even Richard, so cocky, grew stiff when someone asked if his boss had arrived yet. Emma touched his arm as they crossed the floor. "You've never told me his first name." Richard smirked, sipping champagne. "Names don't matter when you own everything. To us, he's Mr. Hayes." A tremor of unease threaded through her. She pushed it down, lifting her glass as if to drink it away. Across the ballroom, a side door opened. Conversation softened. The string quartet shifted. Heads turned in unison, as though the air itself bent around a presence. Emma followed their gaze. The man stepping into the room didn't stride like Richard did, chest puffed, desperate to be seen. He moved with quiet control, his tailored black suit fitting as though the world had been cut to measure it. His hair was neatly swept back, his expression composed but commanding. Executives straightened at his approach, conversations died mid-sentence, and the hum of awe spread like ripples in a pond. Emma's breath caught. It was Daniel. Her Daniel, hoodie-wearing, ramen-eating, struggling Daniel, standing under the chandeliers like he had been carved for this room all along. She froze, the glass in her hand trembling. Richard leaned close, oblivious. "There he is. My boss. The man who made all this possible, Mr. Hayes." Daniel's gaze swept the room, cool and assured. And then, without breaking stride, his eyes found hers. For the briefest instant, the calm cracked, and Emma saw the man she once loved, the man she betrayed. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Richard tugged her forward eagerly. "Come on, Emma. I want to introduce you." The chandeliers blazed overhead, as if bearing witness to the moment her entire world tilted on its axis. Richard's grip tightened on Emma's arm as they approached the circle forming around Daniel. Executives clustered, eager for approval, their laughter trimmed and careful in his presence. Daniel stood still at the center, like the calm eye of a storm. "Mr. Hayes," Richard began, his voice just a shade too loud. "An honor, as always. I wanted you to meet someone very special." Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to pull away, to vanish into the marble floor, but Richard propelled her forward like a prize. "This is Emma," Richard declared proudly. "My partner." The room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Daniel's gray eyes locked onto hers, expression unreadable, a wall of composure that only she knew was not indifference but a deep, deliberate choice. "I know her," Daniel said simply. Richard laughed awkwardly. "Well, of course, you've probably seen her name on the guest list. She works in—" "She's my ex-wife," Daniel interrupted, voice calm but carrying enough weight to slice through the murmurs. A ripple of shock swept the circle. Glasses lowered. Eyes widened. Whispers flared and died like sparks on stone. Richard's smile faltered, the color draining from his face. He stumbled a half-step back, staring at Emma as if she'd transformed before his eyes. "Ex-wife?" Emma's lips trembled. "Daniel, her voice broke, words crumbling into the thick silence. Daniel didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice. "When she left, she said I was poor. That I'd never give her the life she wanted." His gaze swept the crowd, sharp and steady. "But people here know the truth. I built this company from the ground up. And Richard, the man she chose instead," Daniel's eyes flicked to him like a final blow, "works for me." The crowd stirred again, this time with hushed astonishment and barely concealed delight at the scandal unfolding. Richard's hand fell from Emma's arm as if she burned. "You," Richard's voice cracked. He turned to Daniel with stammering desperation. "Sir, I had no idea." Daniel silenced him with a glance. "Your personal life is your choice. But flaunting betrayal in front of me? That's poor judgment. And judgment matters in my company." Richard paled, sweat beading his brow. Emma's chest constricted as she realized the chain of ruin her choices had set in motion, not only her own but Richard's too. "Daniel, please," Emma whispered, stepping closer. "I didn't know. I didn't." Daniel's calm deepened, a mask forged from years of restraint. "No. You didn't know. You didn't want to." His voice lowered, but each word carried like steel. "I gave you love when I had nothing. And you traded it for money you thought was more." The string quartet faltered into silence. The chandeliers above burned brighter, merciless. Emma's tears blurred the marble floor as the reality crushed her. Richard turned on her, venom in his whisper. "You knew nothing, Emma. And you've just cost me everything." But Daniel had already turned away, leaving her frozen in the spotlight of her own undoing. The limousine ride home after the gala was suffocating. Richard sat rigid in the leather seat, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped a crystal glass he hadn't touched. Emma sat opposite him, staring at the blur of city lights through the tinted windows. The silence was sharper than any words could have been. Finally, Richard snapped. "Do you realize what you've done?" His voice cracked with rage. "You paraded me into that ballroom, into my boss's sight, with your secrets festering like a rot beneath my career. I'm finished because of you." Emma flinched. "I didn't know, Richard. I thought." "You thought." His laugh was hollow. "You thought Daniel was a nobody. You thought you traded up. But the man you mocked, the one you left me for, is the man I answer to every morning. Do you understand what that makes me look like?" Her throat tightened. "We can fix this." Richard shook his head, eyes cold. "No, Emma. You're toxic. Do not come near me again." When the car stopped, he didn't even wait for the driver to open the door. He stormed out, leaving Emma on the curb, mascara streaked down her cheeks, dress clinging to her in the night air. The penthouse door was locked when she arrived. By morning, her belongings were in suitcases outside, like discarded trash. Back in her tiny old apartment, the one Daniel had once paid for, Emma sat on the floor amid the boxes, her hands trembling. Rage simmered beneath her humiliation. She replayed Daniel's words at the gala, the calm way he dismantled her in front of everyone, the way he left her standing exposed. I gave you love when I had nothing. And you traded it for money you thought was more. The words cut deeper than any knife. That night, she opened her laptop and searched for lawyers. If Daniel wanted dignity, she would take what he valued most, his fortune. She convinced herself she had a right to it, that years of sacrifice entitled her to half of everything. The thought hardened into obsession. 2 weeks later, Emma walked into the courtroom in a tailored suit she could barely afford, chin lifted high. The cameras outside flashed, the media had caught wind of the scandal. To the public, she was the betrayed wife of a secret billionaire. She would spin that narrative until the world believed it. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his legal team, calm as ever in a dark suit, his composure infuriating. Grace, his new wife, sat quietly behind him, her hand resting on her lap, her eyes never leaving him. Emma noticed the way Grace leaned forward to whisper something encouraging before the hearing began, the quiet loyalty that Emma had once been too restless to give. The judge entered, and the trial began. Emma's lawyer rose with fire. Your Honor, my client was deceived. Mr. Hayes concealed his assets throughout the marriage, hiding billions while she lived as if married to a pauper. She is entitled to half his fortune. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Emma smiled faintly, tasting the victory she believed was coming. But Daniel didn't even flinch. He leaned forward, whispering something to his lawyer, who stood and calmly opened a folder. Your Honor, his lawyer said, before we continue, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, the prenuptial agreement signed by Mrs. Carter before their marriage, witnessed and notarized. The judge raised a brow. Emma's blood turned to ice. The courtroom felt colder as the prenuptial agreement was slid across the judge's bench. Emma stared at it, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She recognized her signature instantly, her own name written in flowing ink from years ago, beside Daniel's calm hand. Her lawyer blinked, trying to recover. This agreement cannot possibly cover billions of dollars acquired after the marriage. My client was misled. Daniel's lawyer, a silver-haired man with a voice like tempered steel, rose. On the contrary, Your Honor. The agreement explicitly covers all current and future assets. Mrs. Carter signed it willingly. We have witnesses present, including the officiant who notarized the document. The judge adjusted his glasses and scanned the pages. Emma's stomach sank as the sound of paper turning echoed through the hushed room. Her lawyer pressed forward, desperation seeping into his tone. Even so, Mrs. Carter lived in poverty while Mr. Hayes secretly built an empire. That deception alone is grounds to invalidate this contract. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady and calm. Your Honor, there was no deception. She knew I was building something. She called it a waste of time. She mocked the long nights, the investor calls. What she didn't know was by choice, I never flaunted wealth. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Some people nodded, others glanced at Emma with thinly veiled judgment. Emma shot to her feet. That's not true. You made me believe we had nothing. Daniel turned his eyes on her, expression unreadable. No, Emma. You chose to believe it because wealth was all you ever wanted. The judge rapped his gavel for silence. Mrs. Carter, sit down. Emma sat heavily, rage swirling in her chest. Daniel's lawyer continued. Furthermore, we have evidence of Mrs. Carter's infidelity, corroborated by photographs and testimony. She left her husband for another man while the marriage was still intact. By law, her claim to his fortune is void. Emma's lawyer paled. Objection, irrelevant to financial disclosure. The judge cut him off. Overruled. Infidelity is relevant when one party seeks to profit after abandoning the marriage. Gasps filled the room. Emma buried her face in her hands, but it was too late. The damage was done. Grace sat quietly behind Daniel, her expression calm but resolute. She reached forward, resting her hand briefly on his shoulder, and the small gesture carried more weight than Emma's entire case. It was loyalty made visible. By the time Daniel's lawyer finished presenting bank statements, call logs, and emails proving full disclosure, Emma's case was unraveling completely. The judge leaned back in his chair, his verdict clear in his tone. The prenuptial agreement stands. Mrs. Carter knowingly relinquished any future claim to Mr. Hayes's assets. This case is dismissed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Emma sat frozen, her lawyer whispering apologies she didn't hear. Daniel stood, buttoning his jacket with unshaken composure. He didn't glance at Emma as he turned toward Grace, who rose to meet him with quiet pride. Together, they walked out of the courtroom like victors who hadn't needed to lift a sword. Emma, left behind in the harsh light of her own ruin, clenched her fists until her nails dug crescents into her palms. The humiliation wasn't enough, she wanted blood. And as the cameras flashed outside, a darker thought took root in her mind. If she couldn't take his money, maybe she could take him. The night after the court's dismissal, Emma sat alone in a dingy motel room, the sound of a flickering neon sign buzzing through the window. She had pawned her jewelry to pay for the room, Richard's necklace, the diamond earrings he once flaunted in front of her friends. All gone, just like Richard himself. The tabloids had made her a spectacle. Billionaire CEO crushes ex-wife in court. Emma Carter's fortune fantasy ends in disgrace. Headlines bled across every newsstand. She couldn't walk into a store without hearing whispers, couldn't open her phone without seeing her name twisted into mockery. She slammed the device onto the bed. He destroyed me. Her reflection in the mirror looked older, harder. The lines around her eyes weren't just from stress, they were from bitterness calcifying into rage. You humiliated me, Daniel, she muttered to the glass. You stripped me of everything. And you smiled while you did it. But beneath her fury was something sharper, envy. The image of Grace sitting quietly behind Daniel in court gnawed at her. Grace's calm, her loyalty, the way Daniel looked at her with quiet affection. Emma realized she had been replaced not only in Daniel's life but in the very role she once dismissed, the steadfast partner. That night, she met with a shadowy contact in a downtown bar. A man with a scarred face and cold eyes slid into the booth across from her. You want him scared, the man said. Emma shook her head, fingers trembling as she clutched her glass. Not scared. Gone. I want him gone. The man studied her. That's not a light request. I'll pay whatever it takes, she hissed. He ruined my life. He made me a laughingstock. If I can't have him, no one will. The man leaned back, weighing her words. Payment up front. Information second. If he's as powerful as you say, we'll need his routines, his habits. Emma nodded quickly, desperation blinding her. She scribbled Daniel's schedule on a napkin, the times he usually worked, the routes he once drove when she lived with him. She didn't know about the private security, the undisclosed meetings, the layers of protection around a man like Daniel Hayes. She didn't care. As the man pocketed the napkin, Emma felt a surge of twisted satisfaction. At last, she was striking back. At last, Daniel would know she wasn't powerless. But what she didn't realize was that Grace, ever watchful, had already noticed strange movements. Weeks earlier, Grace had seen Emma lurking outside the corporate headquarters, watching Daniel's car from across the street. And when Grace intercepted a cryptic message left on one of Emma's old friends' phones, mentions of taking him out and final payment, she didn't hesitate. She dialed the police, her voice steady but urgent. This isn't just bitterness anymore. My husband's life is in danger. That night, Emma dreamed of Daniel's empire collapsing into silence, of Grace's loyalty breaking under grief. But when she woke, Sirens wailed outside the motel, red and blue lights staining the walls. Her door burst open, officers flooding in. The scar-faced man was already in custody, evidence in hand. And Emma. Emma was dragged from the bed in handcuffs, screaming her denial as flashbulbs from waiting reporters seared her final downfall into public memory. The holding cell stank of bleach and stale sweat. Emma sat on the narrow bench, her hair tangled, her dress from the night before wrinkled and damp from tears. The metallic clank of the cell door echoed behind her. Reporters had already swarmed the precinct, her mugshot would be on every screen before dawn. "You don't understand," she spat at the officer scribbling notes outside her cell. "He deserves this. He ruined me, he humiliated me in front of everyone." The officer didn't look up. "Save it for the judge." Her lawyer refused to meet her eyes when he arrived. "They've got recordings, Emma. Conversations, wire transfers, a full sting operation. You walked right into it. There's no plea that will erase attempted murder for hire." Emma's chest tightened. "This can't be happening. I just wanted what I was owed. He took everything from me." "No," her lawyer said flatly. "You lost everything because you threw it away." Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his study, the soft light from the lamp washing across his desk. Grace sat beside him, her hand folded into his. She had been the one to uncover the plan, the one who had tipped off the police in time. Daniel turned to her, his calm breaking just slightly. "You saved my life." Grace shook her head gently. "No, Daniel. I just protected what we've built. The life you almost lost because someone couldn't see your worth." His eyes softened as he looked at her, at the woman who had stayed when the world saw only failure, who had believed in him when Emma demanded glitter. Grace had seen the empire in his patience, not just the fortune in his name. On the news, Emma's arrest dominated the headlines. Ex-wife of billionaire CEO charged in murder-for-hire plot. From socialite to suspect, Emma Carter's shocking fall. Daniel's board members called, worried about scandal, but Daniel answered each one with the same unshaken steadiness. "This doesn't tarnish me. It reveals her." At Emma's arraignment, the courtroom that had once been her stage for revenge now became her cage. Shackled at the wrists, she stood before the judge, her voice cracking as she pleaded. "I was desperate. He left me with nothing." The judge's gavel silenced her excuses. "You chose greed over loyalty. You chose violence over dignity. This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to trial." Bail denied. Emma was led away, her eyes darting wildly, searching for sympathy that never came. The same cameras that once adored her now recorded her ruin. Outside, Daniel and Grace stepped into the sunlight, reporters crowding them with questions. Grace held Daniel's hand firmly, her presence unshaken. Daniel paused long enough to say one thing, his voice calm, deliberate, final. "Greed destroys itself. I don't need revenge, her choices already gave it to me." The cameras flashed as the couple walked forward, not as scandal's victims but as proof of resilience. Behind them, Emma disappeared into the prison van, the steel door slamming shut like the last chapter of her downfall. The cell door slammed with a finality Emma had never felt before. She sank onto the thin mattress, staring at the gray cinderblock walls, the sour smell of disinfectant clinging to everything. Gone were the chandeliers and penthouses, the gowns and champagne. Now she wore state-issued beige, her hair tied back with an elastic band that pinched her scalp. Her cellmate, a woman with tired eyes and a scarred cheek, studied her with disinterest. "First time?" she asked, voice gravelly. Emma nodded weakly. The woman smirked. "You'll get used to it. Or it'll eat you alive. Depends how much pride you're willing to swallow." Emma turned her face toward the wall, clutching her knees. She replayed the last year like a cruel montage. Her laughter at Richard's rooftop dinners, her mockery of Daniel's poverty, her smugness walking into court. And then the look on Daniel's face at the gala, steady and composed, as though he had known all along how this would end. At night, she dreamed of Grace leaning forward in court to whisper encouragement to Daniel, Grace's quiet strength standing where Emma had once stood. The image gnawed at her, leaving her hollow with jealousy and regret. Meanwhile, life outside moved on without her. Daniel and Grace walked together through the glass doors of H&N Global Headquarters, greeted by staff who stood straighter in their presence. Daniel's calm authority carried further now, not just as a billionaire CEO but as a man whose dignity had outlasted betrayal and danger. Grace moved beside him, no longer his secretary but his partner, the woman whose loyalty had literally saved his life. At night, their home was filled with warmth, not luxury flaunted but comfort chosen. Daniel read reports in the study, and Grace brought him tea, resting a hand on his shoulder. He'd look up at her, gratitude softening his usually stoic expression. "You stayed when it cost you everything," he told her one evening. "Emma left when she thought I had nothing. That's the difference. And that difference saved me." Grace smiled faintly, brushing her fingers over his hand. "You don't have to thank me. I saw you before the world did. That was enough." News outlets dissected Emma's case endlessly. Talk shows debated her downfall, some calling it a cautionary tale, others mocking her greed. Documentaries were pitched. To the world, she became a symbol of betrayal punished. But for Daniel, she was no longer anything. He rarely spoke her name, and when he did, it was only in private moments with Grace. "She taught me a lesson I couldn't have learned any other way," he admitted. "That love without loyalty is just a transaction. And I don't deal in transactions." In her prison cell, Emma clutched the thin blanket tighter, drowning in the noise of shouting inmates and clanging bars. Her pride, once her shield, had become her shackle. She had lost Daniel, lost Richard, lost wealth, freedom, and dignity. All that remained was the echo of her own choices. For the first time, she realized she had no one left to blame. The prison yard was bleak under the winter sun, a cracked concrete field ringed by high fences and razor wire. Emma shuffled out with the other inmates, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. The laughter and chatter of the women around her felt like static she couldn't reach. She stared through the chain link toward the distant skyline, the city where Daniel lived, where Grace walked freely at his side, where the empire she might have shared thrived without her. A reporter's voice carried faintly from a guard's radio. CEO Daniel Hayes was honored today for his philanthropic foundation's new initiative providing scholarships for underprivileged youth, the words twisted inside her chest. Daniel had become not just a billionaire, but a man admired, respected, loved by thousands. And she? She was a cautionary headline, forgotten except as a story of greed turned to ash. That night, in the narrow dark of her cell, she whispered aloud to no one. "I left you because I thought you were nothing. And you turned out to be everything." Her voice cracked, tears sliding down her face. "And I'll never get another chance." Across town, Daniel and Grace stood on the balcony of their home overlooking the city. The air was crisp, the lights below endless. Grace leaned into him, her hand sliding into his. He pressed a kiss to her hair, his calm face softening in the glow. "You know," Grace said quietly, "you could have destroyed her completely in court. Humiliated her worse than she humiliated you." Daniel shook his head. "She destroyed herself. I didn't need to lift a finger." He paused, tightening his arm around her. "The truth is, the real revenge isn't her downfall, it's the life we have now. A life she threw away." Grace smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Together they watched the city breathe, the empire Daniel had built not just in wealth but in resilience and dignity. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's name grew brighter. His foundation expanded, his company flourished, his reputation soared. Wherever he went, Grace was there beside him, the quiet partner who had seen the man beneath the mask and stayed. In prison, Emma watched his face on TV from the common room, bitterness and regret swirling like a tide she could never escape. The other women barely noticed her anymore. She was no longer glamorous, no longer envied. Just another inmate with a story that no one envied. She pressed her palms against the glass screen, as if she could reach through it, back to the life she had abandoned. But the image flickered and changed, leaving her with nothing but the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of her own choices. Daniel and Grace, standing before cameras at another gala, smiled as flashbulbs burst like stars. The contrast was absolute, loyalty beside love, betrayal trapped in ruin. And as Daniel clasped Grace's hand tighter, he said the words that would become the lasting moral of his story. Greed destroys itself. Loyalty builds everything. The crowd applauded, the cameras captured it, and somewhere in the silence of her cell, Emma Carter wept for the empire she had thrown away.